Okay, welcome to another video. So it's been a little while now since I've last uploaded to the channel. Now, like a lot of you might know, and as been previously mentioned in the last couple of videos, I've been in the process of moving home and the whole thing's been a massive nightmare and taking a lot longer than what it really should have. But we're here now, so I can stop complaining about that, and today will mark the first time we filmed a new video in the new place. So I've got everything set up how I like to do these videos, but I have picked up on a little bit of an echo which might come through for the first couple of videos, while I'll do what I can over my next few days just to reduce the echo so we're all good. But today, the distribution we're going to be kicking back into it with is the newest version of EndeavourOS, which was released on December the 3rd, and I think it's their first one that's now got an actual code name for the release, and this one is called Atlantis. So before we jump straight into it and get this installed, we'll hit on a few points from the release announcement, but it shouldn't take us too long, because Atlantis is mainly more focused on technical improvements in this release. So first up, we have some EOS apps improvements and additions. So NVIDIA users have a new sanity check for NVIDIA and kernel updates, okay. Welcome has a new button, which is DE information. So this will open up the browser to the dedicated DE or desktop environments info page, okay, that's quite handy. And then their EOS apps info is added by default, and the EOS Apps Info helper is now capable of showing information about many more apps and supports using a web browser which can be configured by yourself. An addition to the Cache Service Manager has been made, which now ships with a checkbox for deleting the cache of uninstalled packages. So that's quite handy, a nice easy way to do a bit of system maintenance. A new and improved schedule configuration window for the EOS Update Notifier. Okay, that can be pretty handy as well. And then we have the function of grub tools, which now adds info and warnings when needed about variable grub disable. So we've got the OS prober, and that will be in etc default and grub. We have an improvement on AKM that marks the current running kernel with an asterisk. And then moving on to Calamares, which is of course what EndeavourOS uses to install your system. So we have the option to send logs. Calamares can read the output from Pacman actions, and we now use a randomized EFI path naming. Installing XFCE and i3 at the same time is possible again. Interesting, I wasn't aware that was ever an issue. I think what we'll do for this video then, we'll go ahead and install both of these in the actual installation part and see how we get on. We then have fstrim.timer is now enabled by default, and then the NVIDIA proprietary driver DRM and mode setting is enabled by default. And then the NVIDIA driver still gets installed by default if a user boots from the NVIDIA boot option. And you'll see that when you sort of boot into the ISO, you've got a couple of options of what you want to jump into. It's very handy for NVIDIA users. ButterFS now uses ZSTD for installation on both the SSDs and HDD. So I think again, what we'll probably do for this video is, as ButterFS is my preferred file system, we'll go ahead and install it on ButterFS. A package list cleanup on the i3 window manager and all of the DE and selections to install only the most necessary settings, okay. The EndeavourOS repo packages and welcome app now connect to GitLab as opposed to GitHub. Interesting. So this avoids issues for users that have blocked GitHub in certain countries, okay. And then we have the method to install one of the community editions has been changed. Now you choose the community edition first, which is a fixed settings package that can't be altered, and that's in order to avoid failed installs. Okay. And then we have some ISO and running system changes. So OS Prober, like mentioned before, is quite useful for you if you've got sort of multiple operating systems, so it's easy to select them in your sort of boot screen like that. So as you can see, for a better experience managing multi-booting several systems. We then have some improvements to legacy boot. We now have the possibility to write our own bash commands to file user commands bash, okay. Legacy BIOS boot now has a fixed label to make it compatible for older BIOS systems. And then the R8168, so that's going to be for like your Ethernet driver, is not installed on the ISO anymore. Instead, the 8169 module from the kernel is used by default when the ISO boots, but they do have auto detection, so you can switch over if you've got any issues. We'll check that out once we first start up. And then we have a VMD fixes have been made to prevent the issue of Intel RST technology drives not being recognized by the system. And then so we can get certain PCIe based M.2 drives recognized by the system, they've enabled NVMe_load yes to the grub command line Linux default, again an etc default grub. The Sway window manager is now using LYDM as a workaround due to light DM issues in combination with the window manager. I wasn't actually aware that there was an issue there with Sway, but then I've not really used it too much. Okay. Pipewire is now enabled by default. We've got some new community wallpapers. A hotfix feature is added to the ISO so developers can immediately push an immediate bug fix to the ISO without creating a new one. So that's very cool. And then I think that's pretty much it. So the ISO size for this one is around about 1.9 GB, so just under 2 GB. And with that out of the way, let's jump into the live environment and get this installed. Okay, so here we are in the live environment. So the first thing that popped up was what was mentioned in the release announcement about the sort of kernel driver for our Ethernet there. So we're using R8169 by default, but in the rare circumstance that it doesn't work, we can also switch to the older 8168. So we'll keep it on the default for now, and then we'll keep it moving. So in a minute, the welcome screen should pop up, and then from that we can launch the installer. And there it is. So what we're going to do is go ahead and start the installer. Now with EndeavourOS, you've got two options or methods as where it comes to actually installing. We have an online and an offline. So the online method lets you choose your desktop with vanilla theming, and internet connection is of course required. And then the offline method gives you just an XFCE desktop with EndeavourOS's own theming. What we're going to do, because I want to check out this sort of installing both XFCE and i3 at the same time, we're going to choose online, so we should be good to go with that. And one thing that I do quite like about the way EndeavourOS goes ahead and sets up and installs your system, it opens a cool little install log in a terminal window here if there's any issues, and you can just quickly jump over there and see what's what. Now all we need to do is to start off with is choose our language, which for me is British English, and then go to the next step. So it's already got the correct region, which for me is Europe, London. Well, it's not actually, I'm not anywhere near South anymore, but we won't worry about that for now. We'll leave it on London, time zone's the same. So English UK is the correct layout, and then we just test the keyboard there to make sure that's all working, and then we'll go to the next step. Okay, so now it comes to the actual installation part of sort of partitioning your drive. So what I'm going to do is select an SSD, and then we're going to go for the erase disk here and see what options it gives us. So we have the options of swap, so we can do no swap, swap with Hibernate, swap without, or swap to a file. And then by default, the pre-selected file system is ext4. But like I mentioned, I'm a ButterFS guy, so we're going to go ahead and choose ButterFS. And we will do swap with Hibernate, and we'll make sure that all works towards the end of the video as well. So that's going to give us 3 partitions, one very small one for our EFI, and then we've got a 15 GB partition for the swap, which is large enough to suspend to disk with full hibernation, and then the rest is all assigned to your root partition, with of course ButterFS being the file system. And then that brings us onto the desktop selection, and that's one of the cool things about EndeavourOS. When you choose the online method, you've got all of these other options as opposed to their kind of flagship XFCE. So first up, we do have the option to choose an additional kernel to install of the LTS kernel. So you don't need to choose this, it will install one for you anyway, of course, so I'm not going to worry about that for now, but if you wanted to also have the LTS kernel, you can just check that box and be good to go. So as far as desktops, we have XFCE, KDE, GNOME, i3 the Window Manager, the Mate Desktop, Cinnamon, Budgie, and LXQT. And then we can also install some things like printing support, and then we have some accessibility tools, which are things like a sort of screen reader, Orca, and all of that good stuff. So I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead and highlight XFCE, and if we expand that, we can see all of that's going to grab. So that's going to get the EndeavourOS theming for us. So it won't be that vanilla look, it will look kind of like what you can see on our desktop right now. And that's also of course going to grab the XFCE for desktop. Now for the window manager of i3, let's just expand that. So that's going to grab a whole lot of additional packages. Now I'm going to imagine a lot of this we probably won't need. So for example, the default media player on their i3 window manager is going to be celluloid, but I'm going to imagine that will probably sort of XFCE will have its own media player as well. So I won't deselect any of that because I want to check out the sort of default installs that it does, but we'll bear that in mind when we go through the applications if there's any sort of duplicate applications that kind of do the same functions. Let's press next, and now we get to our user account time. Now this is called Atlantis. Let's go ahead and type in Atlantis for the computer name, type in our password. Now we will use the same password for the administrator account, but I won't log in automatically, and we can see how the sort of login screen looks like with the nice new wallpaper. So let's press next. There's our summary to make sure we've made no mistakes, and install now. So I'll pause the video here and come back once that's finished. And there we go, the installation has complete without any issues whatsoever, and was done in a little under 10 minutes on my machine. But with all of that out of the way, let's reboot and check out our freshly installed EndeavourOS. And here we are, and that's taken us straight to our login screen. It's looking very nice with the new wallpaper there with the transparent elements. So as you can see here, we can see the default session has got the little XFCE logo there. So if we press that button, we should then see that we can indeed confirm that i3 has installed at the same time of XFCE without any issues whatsoever. Now we'll start on XFCE and we'll finish on i3. So we'll keep it in the XFCE session for now. And let's log into our desktop. And here we are in our XFCE session. Now I am actually quite a big fan of the way that EndeavourOS themes and implements XFCE, but we'll go through their theming and all of that good stuff in just a moment. So the first thing that's going to start up when you first boot up is the EndeavourOS welcome screen. So it defaults to open up on the page of after install, and there's a little sort of checklist of things here that we can go ahead and do. So the first one is going to go ahead and use Reflector to update your mirrors. So here we go, we've got it on United Kingdom, and we're going to use HTTPS mirrors. So we're just going to press OK, and that's going to go through and rank all of our mirrors for us. Okay, that's done. So we're now going to save our new Arch mirror list to the pacman.d/mirror list like so. It's going to ask you for your sudo password. Bang, super simple. So EndeavourOS is kind of one of those Arch-based distributions that hold your hand a little bit, so just enough to get you up and off your feet, but it kind of wants you to focus on learning your system, so they don't really include things like PAMAC, AUR and stuff like that to sort of easily use a GUI to install applications, but Yay is installed out of the box, and we'll go through all of that good stuff in just a moment. Next up, we have Update System, pretty self-explanatory. That's going to open up a terminal window and then run through any sort of updates you need to get. So as you can see, it's also searching there for the AUR, so you do have the full sort of AUR Arch user repository ready to go with the AUR helper of Yay, so we can press enter. That's found nothing, so we can keep it moving. We have package cleanup configuration. Okay, so modifies the service that cleans up Pacman cache periodically. Below you'll see settings and their current values. Okay, so this is pretty cool. So at the moment our package cache usage is 644 MB and we have free disk space of 96. Now we can change the cleaning period to check in kind of intervals. So by default it's set on weekly. I think we'll leave it on weekly. And then we can choose the number of package versions to keep. And it's quite handy to sometimes keep multiple versions of packages if you run into any issues. And then we can also check to remove uninstalled but still cached packages now. So I think I'm pretty happy with that. We'll leave that on the default and keep it moving. Again, it's going to ask you for your administrator password. And then we have the EOS update notifier. So it did say that we've got some scheduling and stuff that we can do on here, doesn't it? So configure and manage features of the EOS update notifier. So we can edit the config. We have the timer status, schedule, operation test and reset. So let's jump into the schedule. Right, so here we go. The EOS update notifier, configure the schedule of system update checks. So first check after system startup of 30 seconds and it will do that daily, and then we can also do weekly or monthly. So I think again the default selection there is pretty sane, so I'd leave it on the 30-second daily and just press OK, and then that'll check kind of every time you start your machine up. So that's all good. So that's the EOS update notifier. Let's quit that. And then we have changed display manager. So of course you're going to use LightDM by default on the XFCE session, but we also have GDM for like GNOME, LXDM and then SDDM. So we'll leave it on LightDM and keep it moving. And then we have the EOS Endeavour default wallpapers. Choose another EndeavourOS wallpaper, download more EndeavourOS wallpapers. And then that issue, well not an issue so much, but when it's using the sort of different version of the sort of kernel driver there for your Ethernet. So we're using 8169 by default. But if you run into any issues, you can toggle to use the older version as well. So quite handy to have that there. Then we have logs for troubleshooting, and then we can go for a vanilla XFCE theme because of course we're using the nice EndeavourOS theme that we chose in the installer. And then we can also switch back to Endeavour's one as well. And then we have the option to select the welcome tab. So what would probably be best to select as your welcome tabs? So let's have a look. Welcome tabs are numbered 1 to 5. For example, the after install tab is number 2. So I think what we do is we probably want it on number 3, which is the assistant, but we'll go into that in just a moment. So we'll set that to assistant. Now every time the welcome screen starts up, it will go straight into the assistant page as opposed to the welcome, the after install page that we was just on. So as you see, that started up with the assistant. So the assistant again will help you update your system and update your mirrors. Then we didn't have PackDiff and Meld. Again, we have the troubleshooting logs, EndeavourOS apps help. And here we have browse all Arch packages and then browse all Arch user repository packages. So I'm going to imagine this is just going to open up sort of the Arch website for the packages like so, and then you can search for them and all of that good stuff. And it will pretty much do the same thing for the AUR now as well. There we go. Cool, and then we have application categories and then XFCE information. So if we click that, we should get a bit of information about XFCE. Again, it's just going to open up the Arch Wiki, very handy. Let's close that off. And then we have tips and add more apps. So here they've got kind of some featured applications that are, a lot of users might want to go ahead and have a one-click install when they first start up. So we have LibreOffice, Chromium, the web browser. So Firefox is going to be your default. We have a firewall and a kernel manager. And then we have some Bluetooth packages as well. So I imagine that means that we don't have LibreOffice installed out of the box. Let's open up our application launcher and type in Libre. We don't. So I think what I'll do, we will go ahead and test out how easy that is. Let's press LibreOffice. So it's going to ask you for your administrator password, and then that'll go through and do the steps that it needs to install the LibreOffice package. And is it the fresh or the still? It's the fresh, so that's going to install the LibreOffice fresh suite of applications. Okay, so that's now finished, super simple. So now if we go into our application launcher, we should find the full LibreOffice suite of applications, nice up-to-date versions, or we do indeed. Okay, let's quit that. So that's pretty much everything there in the welcome screen, and we also have the general info tab, which will take you to links on our websites, forums, etc. Now let's just quickly open up a terminal and see what things we are using. So I'm going to imagine the default shell is going to be Bash. If we just do an echo shell, we are indeed using Bash, and now again I think I'm pretty certain that we're using X11 by default as well, and we are indeed of course using X11. Now what I want to quickly do before we take a look around and make any other changes to our system, I want to see how much RAM we're using HTOP when we first start up. So we don't have HTOP installed, so we're going to quickly install HTOP using Pacman, and we're now going to reboot, see how much RAM we're using, and then we'll keep it moving. Right, so we just started back up on a fresh reboot, and as we can see from the output of HTOP there, RAM usage is looking pretty decent on a fresh boot at just over 550 MB at around about 552. So that's really good. So that's with XFCE, and we also have an i3 session as well. And we've also gone ahead and additionally installed the LibreOffice fresh suite of applications. Very happy with that. And then just beneath that, we can see our swap partition, which will be large enough for hibernation, which we'll test out towards the end of the video. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's have a quick look at the default look and feel of the desktop. Now, as far as the implementation of XFCE, it's pretty standard with a nice single panel layout with, of course, the EndeavourOS theming. Now, on our panel, we have a whisker menu, which is going to be your application launcher with your categories to the left, search bar at the bottom, and then some buttons like shutdown and all of that good stuff. And then we have our full list of applications in their corresponding category. We then have a few quick launch applications for Firefox, Funa, which is your default file manager. And it does appear that the theming is using my favorite kind of combination of themes, which is Arc Dark and Arc Icons, but we'll double check that in just a moment. And then we have a nice workspace grid there to switch workspaces, and the default keyboard shortcuts are going to be Control, Alt, Left, Right, or Up or Down, because it's going to be going in a grid, as you can see. So if you just use your left and right, it's going to cycle between the rows. So we're on the first row. If you keep going, it'll just cycle all the way back to the beginning, and the same will be for when you go down like so. So it's going to be on like a little cycle and always go back to the first one that you've begun on. We then have things like our connection, volume, power manager. So I'm not on a laptop at the moment. We have a little battery there. Notifications, we then have our clock, and then we have our little power button, which will get you to all of the options. And XFCE is very cool, having a nice hibernate GUI way there, so we'll test that out towards the end of the video. Now, as far as applications are concerned, like I did mention in the beginning, because we've gone ahead and installed XFCE with i3, there's going to be a bit of a mess of different applications that you could probably go ahead and uninstall some and sort of select the ones that you'd prefer. So let's start in accessories. So we have Archive Manager, Bulk Rename, Compton, Calculator, Nitrogen. So that's going to be for when you're on i3 and you want to change your wallpapers, but we'll go through that in just a moment. Pick on, Screenshot, Text Editor, and your text editor is Mousepad. Is that Mousepad? No, it's a Z. Okay, let's keep it moving. So I think that's pretty much everything in accessories. And then of course, Funa is your default file manager. And in development, we have Icon Browser and Meld. Education, we wouldn't have anything, but we did install the fresh LibreOffice suite of applications. So we have LibreOffice Math. And then for graphics, we have GFarm, LibreOffice Draw, and then the Ristretto Image Viewer. Now for internet, we have SSH Server Browser and the VNC Server Browser. And then our default web browser is Firefox. But of course, like I mentioned, there's a very easy way to go ahead and install another web browser of Chromium, by just going into the sort of additional apps in the welcome screen and selecting Chromium. So all we need to do is go to add more apps and then install Chromium. So again, loads of web browsers we could use, but it's nice to have quite a popular one selected there in the welcome screen so you can quickly go ahead and do that without any issues. So that's pretty much everything that we've got here on internet. And then we have multimedia. So here's where you're going to see an amalgamation of applications that might not all be necessary, like I said, because we have also installed i3. So we have celluloid, which I believe was included in the i3 package selection. We then have MPV media player and then Parole, which I guess is their default XFCE media player. We then have Pulse audio volume control and then the V4L2 test and capture utilities. And then of course we have our full LibreOffice suite of applications. And let's just quickly check to see if it's all set up properly with things like automatic spell checking with our correct dictionary. So if we go on to tools, we see that we've got automatic spell checking enabled, but do we have the dictionary for it? We don't appear to. Very simple fix, I won't worry about that for now. Let's keep it moving. So let's go don't save. And then what else do we have? So then we have settings, super simple stuff. So it's going to be mainly your XFCE settings as well as things like AR and R, which you're going to sort of typically use on sort of i3 for monitor settings and all of that good stuff. We'll go through the theming in just a moment. And then we have system again, so you'll find a lot of the EOS apps, things like your tool log, reflector, update notifier, etc. Okay, so that appears for the most part to be all of the applications installed across both our desktop environment of XFCE and our i3 window manager. Now, like I said, EOS doesn't really like to, well, I wouldn't say they don't like, but they don't include a GUI option to sort of manage and install new applications. Instead, you're going to mainly be relying on a terminal. Now, what I want to do is install Timeshift to see if the sort of sub volumes for ButterFS are all set up to work with Timeshift out of the box. So what we're going to do is open up a terminal window. Now they do include the AUI helper of Yay out of the box. So we're just going to type in Yay S and we're going to go ahead and install Timeshift because Timeshift is not actually in sort of the default repo. So if you try and do it with Pacman, you're going to notice it's not going to find any package. But if we use Yay and then type in Timeshift, this time it will find packages that we want. And there's also going to be an auto snap feature included in the AUR, but we're not going to worry about that for now. We're just going to go for the very standard Timeshift, which is right about there. And there we go, super simple, and Timeshift has now been installed. So what we're going to quickly do is just make sure that that is set up correctly to work with ButterFS snapshots. Let's go ahead and open up Timeshift. And Timeshift is pretty much my preferred way to manage sort of ButterFS snapshots with a nice sort of simple to use GUI. So as you can see there, because it's recognized that we're running ButterFS file system, we can have the option there to use ButterFS. So let's press next. Leave it on the defaults of our root partition there. Next. We'll leave it on a daily and then go next and finish. Okay, so let's see if this has worked. So we're going to press create and hopefully it will create us a snapshot without any issues or whatsoever. And there we go. So the sort of the subvols and all of that good stuff for ButterFS is set up to work out of the box with Timeshift. So super happy about that. Now, a lot of you might not like to always install your applications sort of via a terminal. I mean, I don't always like to. If I don't know what I'm looking for, it's nice to have a GUI to kind of browse and look through different categories. And that's where someone like Pamac's going to come into handy. So I'm going to quickly go ahead and install that and then we should be good to go. Okay, so Pamac has now been installed. So we can quite simply just jump straight into our application launcher and type in Pamac and go ahead and go to add or remove software. I will make sure that's all been set up without any issues whatsoever. So like I said, for the most part, I will stick to using a terminal to install new applications, but every now and then, it's nice to have a little browse. If, for example, we go into communication and news, we can just scroll down for some applications, and it might be something that we, don't know of or we kind of want. So, for example, Discord's right there, and if you want to join the Tyler's Tech Discord server, there'll be a link in the description below. And all we need to do is go ahead and apply, or it's going to ask you for your password. And then that will go ahead and install the applications for you. So like I said, not a complete necessity on these sort of machines, but I do like having a GUI there just for browsing applications. And there we go, so that's been installed without any issues whatsoever. And if we type in Discord, boom, we're all good to go. Now what we're going to do is go into the appearance and then just sort of confirm the sort of versions of theming that we are using. So we are indeed using Arc, but not Arc Dark, we're using Arc Darker, which is a very nice variation of the Arc Dark theme. And then we also have the other sort of arc colors, so standard arc, arc dark, and arc lighter. So for icons, we're not using just the standard arc icon themes. We're using the Arc XD, which is a little bit different. but that's where you're getting these nice sort of folder icon themings there. So I'd have no issue of leaving that on the default theme and not really worrying about changing things up too much. Now what I think we'll do, we'll jump into the i3 session, spend a little bit of time on there, test out hibernation, and then start to wrap things up. Okay, so here we are in the i3 session, a very nice and simply themed there. I like our little bar at the bottom with the information that does show, and then the sort of different workspaces have the nice little sort of iconography there letting you know what's what. Now interestingly, and the modifier key by default is your left super key. This has popped up at the first point, so we seem to have a bit of an issue here. So Firefox starting automatic on each login. So fortunately, it opens you up straight to the page that you're going to want to get to be able to disable it. So let's have a little look at what's going on here. So to disable auto starting Firefox with this readme edit and comment out this line. So this line here appears to be starting up Firefox. So of course your i3 config is the sort of way you're going to sort of interact with your sort of window manager and set things up to how you want. So what that wants us to do is find this line for the exec no starter ID Firefox, and we just need to go ahead and uncomment that to disable it. So let's go ahead and do that now. Now I'm a Vim user, so it's not installed out of the box. So what we quickly go ahead and do is we will install Vim, and we'll use that as our text editor to go ahead and comment out that line. Right, we've installed Vim and we've gone ahead and opened up the config file for i3. So all we need to do is get this line here and put a little hash symbol there to comment that line out. Now we can just write, no, I'll just write it for now because I think there are some other things that we might want to change as mentioned on that web page. Now, we should now just be able to easily reload i3, but that won't really matter for the moment because we're not going to start up and see that change. So we don't need to issue the reload yet, but let's see what else we've got here. So no transparency. So I imagine, would the terminal be transparent by default? Let's have a look. So let's go ahead and see what it wants us to do for the transparency. So again, we've got to go ahead and enable pick on by uncommenting this time. So the first time we commented out, this time we're going to uncomment this line here for transparency. So now what we want to do to enable the transparency is uncomment this line right here. So all we're going to do is backspace, that will turn white to let you know that's like active. And this time we can right quit. So now that we've written all of the changes we wanted to make in the config file, we've done a quick reboot to make sure it's taken effect and things like Firefox isn't just going to load up. So here we are on the boot screen. Let's go ahead and jump straight back into it. Okay, here we are. So it's all just loading back up. Again, I do actually really quite like the default look that they've gone with the bar at the bottom there. Right, so first up, we can see that Firefox hasn't opened by default, so that's all worked. Let's get rid of you, don't show me anymore. If we wanted to enable that, all we'd need to do is do EOS welcome --enable. Okay, and now we want to make sure that transparency is working. So let's open up a terminal. Brilliant, and there we go. So we can now see that the transparency is working, and it does look like quite a nice and clean implementation that they've gone for with i3 with the gaps around there. So we open up a few application windows, you can see the nice gapping between the windows. All good. Now to close applications, pretty simple stuff. We're just going to use our modifier key, which by default for me is the left super key, and we're just going to tap Q. Now to launch some applications, I'm going to imagine we have something bound to our modifier key and D. So let's press bang. Perfect, so that's going to head and open up a nice central little application launcher. And for example, if we wanted to launch any old application, let's say Discord, just type in Discord, hit enter, and then we should be good to go. Perfect, there we go. So let's load that up and then we'll have a little bit of a run through of a few other things and we'll test out the hibernation. But so far so good. Brilliant, so that's all working without any issues whatsoever. Now I've noticed it's using some nice auto move windows with icons in the sort of left where your sort of workspace or tags would be. So for example, we have a couple of quick launch little icons here, the terminal, Firefox and the file manager, and they should all open on their own tag or workspace. Let's give that a go. So first up we'll go for terminal. This time we'll go for Firefox. As you can see, that's created a new workspace with the Firefox icon there, and then it should do the same once more for our file manager. Very nice, and it should be using the same file manager that we're using on our XFCE version. I didn't see anything different there. So as you can see, it's using Funar the same as what we're using on our XFCE session. Brilliant, I really do quite like the sort of setup that they've gone for their i3. So I think what we'll do now is we're going to go ahead and test out the hibernation. Now I don't know if there's a GUI way of doing it on here, but what we're going to do is just open up a terminal, type in systemctl hibernate. So what we're going to do to make sure that's working is in another workspace, let's open up a few applications. So let's open up celluloid, and let's also open up Let's open up Firefox as well. Okay, right, so if we go back onto the first one now, so in order for the hibernation to work and to suspend to disk, when we hit enter, it should go into a very low power state and pretty much nearly go completely off. And then when we mash the enter key on our keyboard to start back up, all of those applications that we have open should still be there, letting us know that hibernation has worked. Okay, so we're just starting back up, and as long as all of those applications are right where we've left them, hibernation has worked without any problems whatsoever. Okay, so as you can see, everything's just loading back up, so I think the internet's still trying to connect, but that should come through in just a moment. But as we can see, all of the applications that were there prior are now still right where we left them, letting us know that hibernation has worked out of the box on EndeavourOS. Very happy so far. Right, so just before we wrap up, I thought some of you might also be wondering what the i3 is using on a fresh startup insofar as RAM. Bearing in mind it's not just i3 we've also got XFCE installed on this machine as well. Shouldn't make too much of a difference, but as you can see there, RAM usage is even lighter, still using just under 380 MB at 379. Now I think that's where I'm going to wrap things up. And that has been my refresh look of EndeavourOS, this time featuring their most recent release of Atlantis. All in all, I really like it. I've long been quite a big fan of EndeavourOS, and I think they just keep improving and building on a nice distribution. I like their default XFCE look and feel, but I'm also quite a big fan of the i3 session that we've got here as well. I think if I was to install this on my own machine, I might just go ahead and install just the i3 and not bother with the XFCE version and see how we go. And I like the fact that although they don't include a lot of the sort of GUI applications that some users might need, I like the fact that they do ever so slightly still hold a new user's hands and kind of point them in the right direction. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe. And if you've really enjoyed it, you can support me on Patreon. Join the Discord, there's a link in the description below. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.